It usually happens in small moments. A group of friends is talking excitedly about last night's game. Someone asks, "Did you see that goal?" Everyone laughs, argues about a referee's decision, debates which team will win the championship, and then the conversation suddenly turns to you. You hesitate. I didn't watch it. For a second, the energy changes. A few surprised looks. Someone jokingly asks, "Wait, you don't follow sports at all?" I remember moments like this clearly. That strange feeling of standing just slightly outside the circle, like everyone shares a language you never quite learned. And the question quietly forms in your mind, why don't I feel what everyone else seems to feel? Psychologist Erich Fromm once wrote in The Art of Loving, "The main task in a person's life is to give birth to himself, to become what he potentially is." In other words, not every mind is meant to find meaning in the same places. Some people feel alive in stadiums filled with roaring crowds. Others feel strangely untouched by it. So what does psychology say about people who simply don't obsess over sports? Is it indifference, or something deeper about how their minds experience identity, emotion, and belonging? That uneasy moment in a conversation about sports often reveals something deeper than just different hobbies. For many people, following a team becomes part of who they are. The jersey, the colors, the rivalry. These things create a shared identity. When a team wins, fans say we won. When it loses, they say we lost. It's not just entertainment. It becomes a small piece of the self. But some people build their sense of identity differently. Instead of attaching themselves to group symbols, they tend to define themselves through personal values, ideas, or individual interests. You might notice it in everyday life. While co-workers argue about last night's match during lunch, one person quietly reads a book, listens, smiles politely, but never feels the urge to join the debate. Psychologist Henri Tajfel, known for his work on social identity theory, once wrote in Human Groups and Social Categories that social identity is that part of an individual's self-concept which derives from his knowledge of his membership of a social group. For many sports fans, that membership feels powerful and emotionally rewarding. But when someone's identity grows more from inner experiences than group belonging, the emotional pull of that collective identity simply feels weaker. It's not rejection. It's just a different psychological foundation. And once identity is built more internally than socially, it naturally begins shaping how a person experiences emotional excitement in the first place. If you watch a stadium during a crucial moment in a game, the emotional intensity is unmistakable. Thousands of people shouting, jumping, celebrating, or groaning in disappointment. For many, this surge of shared emotion feels electrifying. But not everyone's mind enjoys that kind of emotional roller coaster. Some people have a psychological preference for calmer emotional rhythms. Instead of seeking excitement, they instinctively gravitate toward environments that feel steady, reflective, even quiet. Imagine a typical Sunday. One person spends hours watching a championship game, heart racing with every play. Another spends the same afternoon walking through a park, reading a novel, or listening to music. Neither experience is better, but the emotional needs behind them are very different. Psychologist Carl Jung once observed in Psychological Types that the introvert's attitude to the object is an abstracting one. He seeks to withdraw his libido from the object. In simple terms, introverted or inward-oriented minds often pull their emotional energy away from intense external stimulation. So the explosive highs and lows of sports competition may feel exhausting rather than thrilling. Instead of chasing emotional spikes, these individuals often seek depth, moments where their attention can settle and their thoughts can unfold more slowly. And that natural shift away from external stimulation gradually opens the door to something else entirely, a stronger pull toward the inner world of ideas, imagination, and personal reflection. Once emotional energy begins to move away from external spectacles, attention often drifts inward, not dramatically, not consciously at first, just quietly. You might see it in small daily choices. While others spend hours following league standings or analyzing players, Someone else disappears into a long article, a documentary, a creative project, or a late-night train of thought about life itself. The excitement isn't in the scoreboard. It's in ideas, questions, possibilities. Psychologically, some minds are simply more drawn to inner landscapes than public events. They enjoy observing patterns, reflecting on experiences, imagining different perspectives. The outside world still matters, of course, but it isn't always where their curiosity feels most alive. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi described this kind of attention in Flow, the psychology of optimal experience. He wrote, "The best moments in our lives are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times. The best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile." For many people who don't obsess over sports, this stretching of the mind becomes their arena, writing something meaningful, solving a complex problem, learning a new skill, understanding human behavior. While a crowd may erupt over a winning goal, their excitement might come from finally understanding a difficult idea or creating something that didn't exist before. And slowly, this inward orientation begins shaping something even deeper, the ability to stand comfortably apart from what everyone else seems to be doing. In many social circles, sports act almost like social glue. Conversations start easily. The latest game, the big rivalry, the controversial referee call. It's a shared cultural language, so when someone doesn't speak that language, it can feel slightly awkward. At work lunches, at family gatherings, at parties where the television is playing in the background and everyone reacts at the same moment. But here's something interesting psychology often points out. People who stay comfortable with their different interests tend to develop a quiet form of social independence. They learn early that their attention doesn't always follow the crowd. And over time, that realization builds a subtle kind of confidence. Not loud confidence. Just the ability to say, "That's not really my thing," without feeling embarrassed. Psychologist Abraham Maslow touched on this trait while describing self-actualizing individuals in motivation and personality. He wrote that such people are relatively independent of the physical and social environment. In everyday terms, it means their sense of direction doesn't rely heavily on cultural expectations. If everyone around them loves a certain trend, sports, fashion, entertainment, they can appreciate it without needing to participate. This independence doesn't isolate them from others. Instead, it quietly strengthens their connection to authenticity. And once a person begins living from that place, their attention starts shifting towards something even more personal. Not what wins, but what truly feels meaningful. As that independence grows, another subtle shift often appears. The excitement of competition. Who wins, who loses, who dominates the field begins to feel less important than the deeper meaning behind experiences. You might notice it in everyday conversations. When people discuss a game, the focus is usually on the outcome, the score, the strategy, the victory. But someone who isn't drawn to sports may instinctively ask different questions in other parts of life. What did we learn from this? Why do people behave the way they do? What does this moment say about human nature? The focus moves away from rivalry and toward understanding. Psychologist Viktor Frankl wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, "What man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal." The key phrase is worthwhile goal. For many people, competition on a field provides that sense of purpose, but for others, meaning emerges from reflection, growth, creativity, or relationships. Think about someone who spends hours helping a friend through a difficult time, or someone who becomes absorbed in learning a new skill late into the night. The emotional reward doesn't come from defeating someone else. It comes from feeling that life is expanding in some way. So while competition energizes many people, others feel more alive when they sense depth and purpose unfolding beneath ordinary moments. And this shift toward meaning often changes how they respond to another powerful force that sports culture tends to amplify: tribal loyalty. Sports have a fascinating psychological effect. They create tribes. Two groups, two colors. Two sides of a stadium shouting in opposite directions. Within minutes, strangers become allies simply because they wear the same jersey. It's exciting, powerful, and deeply human, but some people feel slightly uncomfortable with that dynamic. Not because they dislike community, but because the emotional division feels artificial to them. They may notice how quickly friendly rivalry can turn into anger toward another team or its fans. One moment people are laughing together. The next moment they are shouting at strangers over a missed penalty. Psychologists often describe this pattern through the concept of in-group and out-group behavior. Henri Tajfel's research on group dynamics showed how easily humans divide themselves into us and them, even when the differences are minimal. For people who don't feel drawn to sports fandom, this tribal energy may feel unnecessary. Their attention tends to move toward broader connections rather than narrow alliances. Instead of feeling joy when one side defeats another, they may feel more interested in understanding people as individuals rather than opponents. And as this perspective deepens, something surprising begins to appear, a very different definition of joy itself. By this point, something important becomes clear. People who don't obsess over sports are not lacking excitement in life. They simply experience it through different channels. While others feel the surge of joy when a team scores in the final seconds, someone else might feel that same quiet thrill while solving a problem that has been bothering them all week. Or while learning something new late at night. Or during a long conversation where two people suddenly understand each other more deeply. Their joy is less explosive but often more sustained. You might notice it in simple moments. A person sitting by a window with a notebook, completely absorbed in writing. Someone listening carefully to a podcast or documentary while walking home. A friend who becomes energized not by cheering crowds, but by discovering a new idea that changes the way they see the world. Psychologist William James once wrote in The Principles of Psychology, "My experience is what I agree to attend to." In other words, what we focus our attention on becomes the center of our emotional life. For sports fans, attention flows toward games, teams, and rivalries. For others, attention flows toward curiosity, reflection, creativity, or understanding. And once a person recognizes this difference, something quiet but powerful happens. They stop feeling like they are missing out. Instead, they begin realizing they have simply been playing a different game all along. Which brings us back to the quiet question that started this journey. If you don't share the crowd's passion for sports, what does that actually say about you? That moment of silence in a conversation about sports can feel uncomfortable at first. Everyone around you seems energized by something that leaves you strangely unmoved. For a long time it may even create a quiet doubt. Why don't I feel what they feel? But psychology suggests a much gentler explanation. Human minds are not designed to chase the same forms of excitement. Some people thrive on collective energy, competition, and the shared identity that sports create. Others are naturally drawn toward reflection, curiosity, creativity, or deeper conversations about life. Neither path is superior. They simply reflect different psychological landscapes. The person cheering in a crowded stadium is experiencing one form of joy. The person walking alone while thinking about a new idea is experiencing another. And perhaps the real discovery is this: you are not disconnected from the world's passions. Your mind has simply chosen a different arena, one where the victories are quieter, but often just as meaningful.